So we are going to start a three-part series on grief. I want to thank Carol for bringing this idea to me, because I do think it's an important one, and I do wonder how many of us haven't maybe dealt with loss and grief in our life, and maybe even as a church body. This past year, obviously, we dealt with loss. We dealt with loss in losing Don and Kay Jones, losing your parents, Carol. And you know, I'm just going to throw this out there for consideration. I haven't heard a lot of you all maybe talk about that or discuss that, how you feel, and I wonder if part of that is to be respectful, thinking, well, Chad's here, he's our minister now, we don't, Don served you all for a long time. For a lot of you all, he is your minister. When you think of a minister, it's Don Jones. I got his picture hanging up now in the Alpha and Omega room because we've kind of redone that. Because I thought I saw that picture and the picture of our founding pastor of this church. I thought it was important to put those up as a remembrance. As a remembrance. We'll talk about remembering in future sermons, but I want you to know that you are free to discuss and talk about and share about Don and Kay or anybody else in this place. That's what this is for. And so I want to give you that freedom. If you've been holding back, just know it's okay. It's okay to talk about that, because people, when we lose them, man, they mean a lot to us, and it's important we discuss it. And I probably couldn't have picked a better time for the grief series after this last week. And this series is done a little differently too. It's actually one big sermon that I just cut in 3 parts. Scott, I figured you probably didn't want me to be here for an hour and 15 giving you one sermon, so I thought I would divide it up. So hopefully if you went back and listen to all 3 together, it should all flow rather than 3 kind of separate sermons on different topics around a similar theme. So it's done a little bit differently. But I got to admit, I felt the importance of this series just lead up to it, because I think you have to be very gentle with how we talk about grief to not do harm, to bring healing. If anything, I hope maybe you get a chance to explore some of your grief and some of your emotions that you've had that maybe you haven't found a way to acknowledge that and to move forward in life with the grief that you may be facing on multiple levels. And hopefully it can provide some comfort and even help you in your faith to where you can feel God present and see God amidst losses. And grief, I think, is a very important response to our circumstances in our lives, because it reminds us of just how much we care, right? We are sad. We get angry because we care, because we've loved, because of maybe how much something meant to us or has meant to us. And grief, when we don't deal with it, is going to be debilitating to us. It's going to harm our emotional, our mental, and even our physical state. You can get physically sick from your grief if you don't deal with it. Your body holds that. There's a good book. I have not read it, so I can only speak to what everybody else has said about it, but I think it's called The Body Holds Trauma or something. Do you know what book I'm talking about, Kathy? It talks about how when we hold that in just kind of the physicalness and the sickness that it can give us. And for a lot of the material I'm using today, I'm using a lot of research that I've already done and read. I've had clinical pastoral education. It's the same training that chaplains receive. I got ordained in Indiana. In Indiana, it's very difficult to get ordained because we had a terrible pastor come out of Indiana in the 60s, and they decided to never again will that happen. So I've gone through mental evaluations. I've been interviewed over and over again. I've had to do clinical pastoral education. I have to receive a master's degree. You can be a disciples pastor from North Carolina. You don't have to do any of those things. You don't have to do any of that. And so I've used some of that education. I've used grief contemporary theory. Obviously, we know some different people who have put out things about grief. So you'll see kind of a hot mashup, if you're familiar with some of the stuff, of things that I find valuable for us that we can use on an individual basis. But I think it's very important for us to understand it, and there's a lot of great material that can help you to explore it even deeper. With all that being said, we should never ignore our grief. Do not suck it down into the depths of your body, right? We have to feel that grief. And sometimes we start feeling the grief as a loss is occurring. You start to notice this if you're dealing with a parent and you're their caregiver. Because the future that you thought you're going to have with your parents, or that you thought you were going to have for yourself, and now you're taking care of a loved one, boy, it can really hit you emotionally. You can start to feel this grief build up because you're starting to experience a loss. That's where grief comes in. It comes from loss. And every single person in this room has experienced a loss of some kind. And Jesus tells us in Matthew 4, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I know we try to be all big and tough and bad. I got to be strong for everybody else, and I can't be emotional. I can't do nonsense. Nonsense. It's not healthy. Jesus himself says we should mourn so we can be comforted. And in our mourning, we are the blessed ones. Why? How are we blessed? Because we receive this comfort that is so important to our health and to our entire self. It provides emotional comfort when somebody acknowledges and validates our feelings, sits with us, holds our hand, gives us a good word. I messaged a friend of mine. I say friend, I haven't seen her in 30 years. I went to high school with her. Her name's Annie. But I will never forget Annie. Because when my mother died when I was 18, your whole world is rocked when you're a teenager, when that happens. And I remember at the viewing, I didn't, everybody's coming in and all these names and people, and it's so overwhelming. And Annie sat with me all day long, and all she did was hold my hand. That's all she did. So I messaged her this past week. I said, Annie, I just want to let you know about this moment and how much it meant to me and how I still think about you just being present and just holding my hand. And I swear to you, you got me through that day. We were only friends. We weren't dating or anything like that in high school. She's just my buddy. And she still remembers that. I was blessed because of Annie in that moment. That's how we get blessed. She knew I was vulnerable. She knew I was hurting. She could see it. She could feel it on me. Obviously, let me just be present with you. And when we get to receive that love from others, this is the blessing. And I would say after this past week, we can see also how grief starts showing up in people's lives. There are different forms of grief that we experience, which I'll touch on. But the shock and mixed emotions that I think a lot of people have around Charlie Kirk is very fair. It's so visual right in front of our face, you couldn't help but click on social media and there it is. We're going to have to deal with that. Young kids are going to have to deal with that. 12-year-olds saw that. We are going to have to deal with that as a society. That is deeply traumatizing to people. And not only do people have that right in their face, and we have to deal with the emotions from something so visual that we also on the very same day had a school shooting. The 47th one this year. 47 times people dropped their kids off at school and received a call of a shooting. 47 times. We are also in the shadow of a time of a shooting that took the life of someone in politics in Minnesota that's affected one of our own. Kathy, you are one of our own. Even though you pastor your own church, We consider you one of our own as well. You are our sister in Christ. We are barely getting over and moving through these things before something else hits us. And it's a lot. And we see these strong effects that all this has in our lives. It's talked about wherever we go. And it's hard not to have feelings or emotions tied to it. And there are some who have a deep connection to these events, even if they're not even in proximity to their lives. Even if we didn't know Charlie Kirk personally or his people or even agree with him, even if we don't, it's not our school. If you're a parent, you can't help but feel. If you love children and want to see the best for children, yet that should be a gut punch every time. And you may see people really angry right now, all over the place. I've seen a lot of videos. The internet is really something. I have not posted anything or said a word because everybody's got something to say right now, and I don't think any of it's helpful because nobody has it well formed. Think about when you've experienced a traumatic loss in your life. In the instances right after, do you have a well-formed thought about it? You do not. The world doesn't need to know what's in your head in that moment. You're grieving, you're scared, you're shook. Give yourself space and time, however long that is. But there's a lot of people right now angry. We're going to retaliate. And they start blaming people, and these people are wrong, and what about these people, and this, and others, and yeah, and buts, and all this stuff is going on. And there's missteps, and there's misinformation that is misleading. In the moments after loss, we don't think straight. The brain shuts down and goes solely into survival mode. This is science. Our frontal lobe shuts down. You cannot think straight. And so, in these moments, is the time for us to sit with that loss and sit with the pain and get involved and surround ourselves with company like Annie who can be together through our losses to help us to unpack and understand. That's a safe place for us to do that because we have grief responses, and anger is a grief response. That's what I see right now. All I see in people is a grief response to our society. We are disappointed. We are sad. We are sad because we are not living into the ideal that we thought. We are not living into what we hoped would be the best of us. We are seeing the worst of our society and human nature on display. But like our verse from Ephesians says today, it says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry." Or as some other verses will say, or some other interpretations, do not let the sun go down on your anger. And I think these are interesting. Depending on your Bible version you read, I think they interpret differently. And I didn't bother to go back and let me look at the original Hebrew on this and the Greek and let's see what this says. I thought, you know what? Because you don't have that info. A lot of you all don't have the info that I get. You just have whatever version of the Bible you open up. And I think both of these interpretations work. If your interpretation says, don't let the sun go down while you are still angry, I interpret that as meaning, don't go to bed angry. And I think there's some power to that. I think there's something to be said about trying to get yourself at the end of the day to a more peaceful place before you go to bed. But I think it's impossible for us to just do away with our anger in those moments. But I think there's something about that. If your other version says, do not let the sun go down on your anger, I interpret that as meaning it's okay to still be angry. And I think that's okay too. You can stay angry about what you're feeling, but do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger, but do not sin. And one way that we need to work on understanding our losses and grief is we got to talk about them. Oh, I know, guys. I know for us guys, it's a hard one to do, because we just weren't raised to do a lot of that. Now, I really love what I see in parents today being much more open about being vulnerable and teaching their kids about their emotions, guiding them in that, to understand it. And I think for a lot of us, when we haven't had that space growing up, we have never really sat and named our losses. I had a minister friend recently, this past week, got a lovely email from a church member. Lovely email. We love those. And very mad about something. What we learn is it's never about the thing we get the email about. It's about something else. And it was. It absolutely was. Because I asked them, I said, what's going on in their life right now? They go, well, they got this going on. There it is. There it is. That's why they're angry. We haven't dealt with that. They haven't dealt with that thing, and something triggered it. And we're going to talk about that. So we have to name our losses. This is the first thing we have to do, is name our losses. Genesis 2:19-20 says, so out of the ground the Lord God formed every animal of the field, every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all cattle, to all the birds of the air, and to every animal of the field. But for the man there was not found a helper as his partner. I'm glad I was not the one who had to name animals, because I can't name anything. It'd be a flabberdoozie or a whatever thingy. I'm very thankful for the candy bar whatchamacallit. That's more like what I would probably name it. Me and my son, we talked about starting a business one time, a store. We're going to call it Stuffing Things. Where do you get there? Stuffing Things. Because we don't know a good name. I'm not good for business. I hope ministry works out for me, because I forget doing that. Naming things is hard, but one thing I can do is I can name my loss. I can name it. I can think about my losses and give them an honest name. Give them an honest name. So that's the first step in this. So make a list. If you have your notes app on your phone and use that, use it. Make a list of your losses. So what does this look like? Kenneth Mitchell and Herbert Anderson talk about 6 kinds of losses. A material loss, which is possessions, could be like a house. A role, right? A loss of a role or function, maybe a loss of a job, retirement. Maybe you're no longer a wife or husband after divorce. A relationship loss. A systemic loss, which is a loss of an entire group or a system experience, like a church losing a minister. A functional loss, losing function of our mobility, maybe eyesight, maybe something that happens after an accident. Or an intrapsychic loss. It's a loss of one's own psyche when thinking too long about our future or worries about our future of the world. Do you know people like that who maybe they've abandoned a lifelong dream, or they are so overwhelmed with grief that they can't ever see a future? So we start with this broader loss, and then we can expand it. So for myself, I may write down about my friend Jeff. My best friend Jeff died in 2020 suddenly. A night I was supposed to go over to his house, hang out, and watch IU basketball. He died. I wasn't there. Grief hits. Guilt hit. Oh, if I was there, I couldn't have saved him. But I had to deal with that. Not only did I lose Jeff, but I lost my best friend. My best friend in the whole world. My guy, my dude, my person. And I haven't replaced Jeff. And I will never be able to replace Jeff. Doesn't mean I can't have another best friend, but right now, and for these past 5 years, it's been a devastating loss. So that's part of the identity in our losses. We want to expand beyond that, right? If you go through a divorce, you may no longer be a husband or a wife. You've lost your partner. You've lost your confidant. You've lost maybe trust. Write down what you've lost in those losses. Expand beyond it. Because maybe In some situations like a divorce, especially if there's abuse, you need to get out of that. But there's other losses that come with that trust. And we have to deal with that in the future so you can rebuild a new relationship. But a lot of times we just pass it by, or we just name the divorce and not all the other byproducts of it. Think about when you retire or lose a job, man, you lose a part of your identity. You may lose your work friends. You lose that daily companionship that you loved. So spend some time with naming these. Don't worry about getting it all done quick. Take your time. In fact, you may be able to rattle off a few things pretty quickly, but 3 weeks from now, something may happen and may hit you. Oh, gosh, what's that? There's that, right? Let me write that down. Because what just creeped up on you was grief. Something triggered you to give you that response. Because we know grief isn't linear. It doesn't run a straight line. It's up, down, all around, back, forth, through the woods. Here we go, right? Grief is not linear. That's why a lot of times I also think it's important for us to identify triggers to our grief. We want to identify things that trigger us. That's why a lot of times videos, there are trigger warnings. I deal with anxiety. There are triggers to my anxiety. So I do things to protect myself, and some people just don't like it. Because my anxiety comes from bad relationships with people. People having free access to me, thinking they can say whatever they want to say to me whenever they want to say it. So I've had to set up certain boundaries to protect myself from that. And some people don't like that. And people can choose not to like it. They can choose not to respect it. But I'm going to set it, and so should you. But you got to understand what it is. And when you set those boundaries, you get the choice on how you want to move through that relationship so it's healthy as you deal with what is going on with you. I didn't realize that taking photos, I still remember what my youngest kid, when we left a band concert when he was in band in middle school, I was taking photos with him, my ex-wife, and her family. I didn't realize that was triggering to me in my grief. Because I have no photos of my parents with my kids. None. My kids never knew my mom. And they don't remember my dad. That was triggering to me in that moment. Why did this not feel good? I have to deal with that. So these will pop up. We're also going to do this in a way that we're going to use people first language. If you've gone through divorce, you are someone who's experienced divorce. You are not a divorced person. You're a person who lost a job, not an unemployed person. We experience something. We are not sad people, but someone who is experiencing sadness. Because what it states is that this time is temporary. What I'm feeling will pass. And I am a person who is experiencing this. I kind of equate it to like a rushing wind. And you get these different words and feelings that come up, and they kind of come and go by us at times, and they hit us, and some are bigger than others. And I think some of the first things we experience after loss is anger. And one of the first things a lot of times we do when we're shocked is deny, as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says in her 5 stages of grief. She says her first stage is denial. And I think it's a good framework with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but it doesn't have to be the rule book. So we want to acknowledge these emotions when they come up. You know, how does my grief manifest in this emotion? Mine does a lot in anger. Some people will fall into a deep depression. So we want to acknowledge that. We also want to acknowledge this kind of thing about denial that happens a lot in our losses right off the bat. We may not want to face the loss. Maybe we're still just in shock over what happened. Sometimes that takes some time. If you lost a job unexpectedly, you are shocked, but at the same time, you have to start hitting the pavement while making sense of what just happened, and you're also concerned about just living day to day. If you lose somebody suddenly, like I lost Jeff, it takes a bit to kind of get used to the emptiness you feel. If you've lost a partner, somebody you share space with, sometimes that loss hits when you're having that meal at the table and they're not there. It can hit you like a freight train. And it's important for us to name it and understand the emotion around it and what triggers us. And I'll just leave you with two more things as I wrap up. I want you to think about the kind of grief we experience. There are three patterns of grief. There's common grief, which is what I think a lot of people are experiencing right now after this week. You get a lot of anger right off the bat, and it's going to slowly fade. What you see in a lot of people, you don't have to be worried about it. You don't got to be concerned about it. People are saying a lot of things. This is what happens. This is a communal grief response. Chronic grief is the more dangerous one. It's one that doesn't fade, but stays, that can debilitate us. And then you have the delayed grief, which is what I experienced when taking those pictures. There's a big reaction, but later on, there's a big reaction, later on. You can look at these three patterns of grief, and you can look at it in maybe some of the same losses that you're dealing with. Are you dealing with a loss right now that happened a long time ago, but all of a sudden it's kind of reared its ugly head? You have a delayed grief response. How we handle and move forward with that is going to be a little different than chronic or common grief. And I think it's important to identify those, because as we move through this series, I'm going to give you some things to help you with that. Last thing is, I want you to know, is you don't have to be strong. You don't have to be strong. You can ask in this moment, where are you, God? Where are you right now? Where are you in the midst of all this? You can cry and you can have mixed emotions. Even Jesus wept. Because what I believe and what I know is that God is with you in your anger. God is with you in your loss, and God is with you in your grief. Love is what comes from God. It's the one emotion we can't fake. It's raw and it's authentic. We can't always control who or what we love. Love just is. Gosh dang it all, we are lucky we get to love. Think about that. We get to love. And everything we love, though, this is the sucky part. It's temporary. Ugh. Why can't it be forever in this moment? It's maybe not forever in this place, but because our hope is tied to Jesus, that love can be lived out beyond. We are so lucky that we get to love and be loved. We are so lucky. Dan Mosley, who has a book, and I usually give it out when people experience loss, and I've ordered some. I hope to have it here for you all and hand some out for anybody that wants to take it. Dan Mosley works in Indianapolis. He works with grief and works in counseling. He helped me and my church in 2016. We went through a devastating tragedy in our church, and he was wonderful to work with. And he wrote a wonderful book about dealing with all kinds of losses. But Dan says, to live is to love is to lose, and to lose is to live. Amen.